Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city. Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Tom Clark sat at the dining table in their tidy home on Maple Street, just outside Columbus, Ohio. The table was old, made of dark oak, with scuffs on the corners, which he kept meaning to sand, but never got around to it. On it stood a bowl of mashed potatoes, still warm, with a light steam rising to the lamp above his head. Next to it is a plate of chicken wings, which Lisa fried in the oven with buffalo sauce, because Ethan liked them a little sticky to his fingers. Everything looked as it should have on a typical Tuesday in late March. It was already getting dark outside, although it was only the beginning of 6, and a weak wind was moving the bare branches of the maples along the street. Spring in Ohio was always late, and Tom grumbled about it every year, but today he was silent, just looking at his family. Lisa sat opposite her. Her blonde hair was tied up in a messy bun, from which strands were falling out. She always did this after work to give her head a rest, as she said. She was wearing a gray t-shirt with a logo of the local school where she taught 4th grade, and jeans that were slightly frayed at the knees. She looked tired, but still smiled when Ethan, their 10-year-old son, said something about his homework. Ethan sat to Tom's right, his thin elbows resting on the table and his dark hair falling over his forehead, almost covering his eyes. He was wearing his favorite Batman t-shirt, which he wore so often that the edges were starting to fray. His voice, high and slightly hurried, filled the kitchen. And then Miss Johnson said we had to write 2 whole pages about how the volcano works, Ethan said, waving a fork with a piece of chicken. But I said that this is stupid, because everyone already knows that lava is hot, and why write about it? And she's like, Ethan, it's science. He rolled his eyes, imitating a teacher, and Lisa laughed. Her laugh was light, slightly husky, as it always was when she was relaxing after a long day. Tom smiled, looking at her, and for a second he felt a warmth in his chest, the kind that happens when everything is in its place. He loved these evenings when the 3 of them sat at the table and there was nothing urgent, no calls from work or school meetings, just them. Family. He reached for the wing, dipped it in the sauce, and took a bite, feeling the heat sting his tongue pleasantly. Well, volcanoes aren't just lava, Tom said, wiping his fingers with a napkin. There are still gases, all kinds of pressure. When I was your age, I made a model of a volcano with baking soda and vinegar. Maybe we can try this over the weekend. He looked at Ethan, expecting him to be fired up with an idea. Ethan loved it when they made things together last summer. They spent 2 days building a birdhouse that still hung in the backyard, although not a single bird had ever flown in. Ethan shrugged, picking at his mashed potatoes. Maybe, but only if you don't have to write 2 pages about it. Tom chuckled, leaning back in his chair. His back ached a little. It had been a hard day at the construction site. He had to carry drawings and argue with the contractor about deadlines. He worked as an engineer for a small firm that built shopping centers and offices throughout the state. Nothing huge, but stable, and it allowed him to keep the mortgage on the house and save some for Ethan's college. He rubbed his neck, feeling the fatigue in his muscles, and glanced at Lisa. She was still smiling, but now her attention was somewhere else. She was looking to the side, at the phone lying next to her plate. The screen was dark, but she suddenly reached out to it, quickly swiped something with her finger, and removed her hand as if nothing had happened. Tom narrowed his eyes. It was a small thing, a barely noticeable movement, but something pierced him. Lisa rarely took her phone at dinner. They had a rule from the time when Ethan was little, and they were trying to be proper parents. No gadgets at the table, only conversations. He himself sometimes violated this by checking his mail, but Lisa was always stricter. And here this quick glance, this movement. He opened his mouth to ask, but decided against it. Maybe just a message from a colleague. She's a teacher. They always have some kind of chat about lessons and parents. It's okay. So what about work, Dad? Ethan asked, snapping Tom out of his thoughts. He had already finished the wings and was now wiping his hands on a napkin, leaving orange stains from the sauce on it. Tom cleared his throat, returning to reality. Nothing special. Today I argued with a guy who thinks that concrete can be poured in the rain. I had to explain that he was wrong, but he still stubbornly resisted. He shook his head, remembering how the contractor, red with anger, pointed his finger at the drawings. Sometimes it seems that I am not an engineer, but a kindergarten teacher. Lisa laughed again, but this time the laugh was shorter, almost mechanical. She took a fork and picked at the mashed potatoes, but did not eat. Her gaze slid back to the phone, and Tom noticed how she pursed her lips slightly, barely perceptible, but he knew her face too well. 10 years of marriage, 12 years together, if you count the 2 years they were just dating. He knew how she wrinkled her nose when she was angry, how she squinted when she was trying to remember something important, and now he saw that she was tense, although she was trying to hide it. "How's your day, Liz?" he asked, trying to sound casual. He took another wing, although his appetite was already gone. "Just to keep your hands busy." She looked up, meeting his gaze for a second, and shrugged. "Ordinary." The children were making noise, as always. One boy spilled paint on his desk and had to clean it up for half an hour. She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. There was also a meeting after school, discussing the spring concert. Nothing interesting. Tom nodded, chewing a wing. Meeting. This explanation sounded logical. Teachers were always delayed because of such things, either the parent committee or plans for school events. But something about her tone, too flat, too rehearsed, caused his internal radar to flash red. He swallowed the bite, feeling the spiciness of the sauce suddenly become unpleasant, and put the half-eaten wing on his plate. "Mom, will you sing at the concert?" Ethan chimed in, looking at Lisa hopefully. "Like last year when you and Miss Evans sang that song about autumn?" Lisa blinked as if coming out of her thoughts and shook her head. "No, this time only children perform. Miss Evans and I are just preparing the scenery." She ruffled Ethan's hair, and he waved it off, but smiled. Tom looked at this scene, Lisa and Ethan, their easy, familiar communication, and tried to understand why everything was shrinking inside him. Maybe he's just tired. The day had been long, and the morning had started with the coffee maker breaking down, forcing him to drink instant coffee, which still tasted like cardboard in his mouth. Maybe it's all in my head. He leaned back in his chair as Ethan went on to tell a story about his friend Mike, who fell off a swing during recess and was now showing off a bruise on his knee. The wind picked up outside the window, and Tom heard the neighbor's trash can clink its lid. An ordinary sound, an ordinary evening. Lisa stood up to clear the dishes, and her phone was back in her hand. She took it with her to the sink, placing it on the countertop nearby, screen down. Tom followed her with his eyes, noting how she was fiddling with the sink a little longer than usual, as if she was stalling for time. He stood up to help, but she waved her hand. "Sit, I'll do it myself," she said without turning around. Her voice was soft, but there was some kind of wall in it. Tom sat back down, looking at Ethan, who was now drawing something with his finger in the remaining mashed potatoes on his plate. The boy hummed something under his breath, a melody from a cartoon he watched in the morning. Tom smiled, but the smile came out forced. He looked at Lisa again. She stood at the sink, her back to him, and her shoulders were slightly tense, as if she was waiting for something. The phone lay nearby, silent, but for some reason seemed to be the loudest thing in the room. Dinner ended as usual. Ethan ran into the living room to watch TV, Lisa stayed behind to wash the dishes, and Tom put the leftover food in the refrigerator. Everything was familiar. Everything was right. But when he went to bed later, looking at the ceiling and Lisa breathing quietly next to him, he could not shake the feeling that this evening was the last he knew. Something has changed. Something small like that glance at the phone, but it has already taken root. Tom turned onto Maple Street as the clock on the dashboard of his old Ford showed 9:15. The sky was black, with rare patches of clouds illuminated by lanterns along the road. The engine purred quietly as he drove past familiar houses, Mrs. Henderson's yellow cottage with her eternal geraniums on the porch, the Johnsons' 2-story apartment, where their Labrador was again barking at nothing. Everything is as usual, but today Tom felt wrung out, like a rag that had been twisted for too long. The work dragged on. The contractor again screwed up the delivery of reinforcement, and it took an hour and a half to sort out the invoices so that the entire construction wouldn't stop in the morning. He only dreamed of collapsing on the sofa with a can of beer and watching basketball for at least half an hour until his brain turned off. The headlights caught their house, a one-story house with white siding and dark green shutters that Lisa had painted last summer, while he held the ladder and grumbled that the paint stank. The garage was open, but her Honda was missing. Tom frowned, turning off the engine. Lisa should have been home. Ethan had already been back from school for an hour. He went to after school until 6, and then his neighbor, Mrs. Kelly, picked him up if he and Lisa were not there. Tom parked, got out of the car, feeling the cold March air creeping under his jacket, and dragged himself to the porch. The keys jingled in his hand as he opened the door. "Ethan," he shouted, throwing a backpack with drawings onto the couch in the hallway. From the living room came the muffled sound of a TV, some kind of cartoon, judging by the high-pitched voices and bursts of laughter. Tom took off his shoes, leaving them by the door, and walked inside. Ethan was lying on the couch, stretched out to his full height, with a pillow under his head. His socks had a hole in his toe sticking out, and an open bag of chips lay nearby. On screen, Batman chased the Joker across the rooftops of Gotham. Ethan looked up when he saw his father and waved his hand. "Hello, Dad." "You're late," he said, without looking up from the TV. Tom nodded, rubbing his sore neck. "Yes, work. Where's Mom?" Ethan shrugged, reaching into the bag for another handful of chips. "She said she would be late. Again, some kind of meeting. Mrs. Kelly picked me up, and Mom called to tell me not to wait for her with dinner." Tom froze, looking at his son. "Meeting. Again. This is the third time in 2 weeks." He walked into the kitchen, trying not to frown, and opened the refrigerator. There stood a plate with the remnants of yesterday's mashed potatoes and wings, carefully covered with film. Lisa always did this, even if she didn't eat it herself. He pulled out a can of beer, slammed the door, and returned to the living room. "Has she called lately?" he asked, plopping down in the chair opposite the sofa. The cold metal of the can pleasantly cooled his palm as he opened it with a hiss. Ethan thought as he crunched on his chips. "An hour ago, probably. She said she would be there soon, but you know how she is with these meetings." He grinned as if it was an old joke. Tom nodded, taking a sip. The beer was bitter and cheap. He bought it by the case at Walmart because he didn't want to spend money on something better. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the screen, but his thoughts were already spinning around Lisa. Meetings. They were always part of her work. The school was always organizing parent-teacher meetings or planning events. But she used to warn in advance. "I'll be late on Thursday. We're discussing a concert," she said at breakfast, while Ethan spread jam on toast. And now it became somehow sudden. Meeting, and that's it. No details. He finished his beer in one long gulp, crushed the can, and threw it on the coffee table. "Have you done your homework?" he asked, more for order than out of interest. Ethan rolled his eyes. "Yes, Dad. Still in an extended period. Only this stupid volcano didn't finish finishing it, but I'll finish it tomorrow." "Okay," Tom muttered, standing up. "I'm going to take a shower. If Mom comes, tell her I'm home." He walked up the stairs to the bathroom, feeling each step pound on his tired legs. Hot water relieved the tension a little, but not completely. He stood under the stream, resting his hands on the tiles, and watched the steam rise to the ceiling. Lisa is delayed. This is fine. She has a job, he has a job. Everything is fine. But for some reason there was still something aching in my chest, like an old bruise that had been accidentally pressed. When he came back down, wearing a towel and an old t-shirt, Lisa was already at home. Hero Honda was parked in the garage. He heard the door slam while he was drying his hair. She walked into the living room, throwing her bag on the couch, and smiled at Ethan. "Hello, sunshine," she said, leaning over to kiss him on the top of his head. "Have you eaten?" Yes, chips, Ethan answered without looking up from the screen. Lisa shook her head, but the smile remained. Then she noticed Tom standing in the doorway, and her face changed slightly. The smile became thinner, almost formal. "Oh, you're home," she said, taking off her coat. She was wearing the same gray t-shirt with a school logo and jeans, but now also a light cardigan that she wore when she went out in the evening. "How long have you been at work?" Tom nodded, crossing his arms. "Yes," the contractor was weird again. "Where have you been?" Ethan said, "Meeting." She walked past him into the kitchen without stopping and opened the cabinet to grab a glass. "Yeah, a meeting. Spring concert, decorations, everything as usual. It took a little longer." Her voice was even, but cold, as if she was answering automatically. She poured water from the tap, took a sip, and placed the glass on the countertop. Tom looked at her, feeling something inside him shrink. He wanted to ask more who was at the meeting, why it was so late, why she didn't call him but only Ethan. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, he said, "You're probably tired. Go rest, I'll turn off the light." She nodded, looking at him briefly. "Yes, thank you." "Good night, Ethan," she shouted towards the living room and went upstairs, leaving Tom alone in the kitchen. He stood there for another minute, looking at her glass. Half of the water remained, drops flowed down the glass onto the tabletop. Then he turned off the light downstairs, put Ethan to bed, and went up to the bedroom. Lisa was already lying in bed, turning to the wall. Her breathing was quiet, but he knew that she was not sleeping too evenly, too neatly. He lay down next to her, pulling the blanket up to his chin, and stared at the ceiling. She didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. She just lay there with her back to him, like a stranger. Tom closed his eyes, trying to clear his thoughts. Fatigue, that's all. She has a job, he has a job. A normal evening, just a little later than usual. But when he finally fell asleep, he dreamed that he was standing in the middle of an empty Maple Street, his family's home disappearing into the fog, and he couldn't find his way back. Tom came down to the living room on Saturday morning, when the gray veil of pre-dawn fog still hung outside the window. The clock on the wall showed 10 minutes to 6, and the house was silent, as if all sounds had been turned off at once. Ethan slept upstairs. His room was directly above the living room, and sometimes he could hear the creaking of the bed through the ceiling as he tossed and turned, but now it was completely silent. Lisa was also asleep, or pretending to be, curled up on her side of the bed when Tom slipped out of the bedroom. He couldn't sleep after midnight, tossing and turning half the night with thoughts that were spinning like a broken record. Something was wrong. He had felt this way for a long time, from that dinner on Tuesday, from her cold answers on Wednesday, from the way last night she left again for a meeting and returned after 10, smelling of coffee and something else that he could not put his finger on. He walked barefoot across the carpet, feeling the coolness of the wooden floor seeping through the fabric where the pile had worn away. He was wearing old sweatpants and an Ohio State t-shirt that had faded from being washed. His hair was still sticking out from his sleep, but he didn't bother to smooth it, not before. He wanted coffee, but the coffee maker had been acting up again since Friday morning, and he had no strength to fix it. Instead, he decided to check his work email to see if the contractor had sent updated drawings that he had promised on Thursday. The phone was upstairs, charging, and Tom didn't want to wake Lisa by fumbling around the nightstand in the dark. So he headed to the family laptop, which sat on a small table in the corner of the living room. The laptop was an old Dell, bought 5 years ago at a crossroads, when Ethan had just started kindergarten. The screen flickers slightly when viewed from an angle, and the keyboard creaked, but it was fine for basic tasks. Tom plopped down in a chair, rubbed his eyes, and opened the lid. The screen lit up, blinding him slightly in the darkness, and he squinted, waiting for the desktop to load. Usually, he and Lisa left it in sleep mode. No one turned it off completely because it took forever to boot. But now the laptop was open on some program, and Tom frowned, peering. It was a messenger. Not the one they used for family chats. There was WhatsApp, where Lisa sometimes sent him photos of Ethan from class or funny memes about teachers. This was another one, Signal, with a dark theme and white lines of text. Tom has never seen Lisa use it. He didn't install this thing himself. He didn't like messengers at all, preferring calls or simple emails. But the window was open, and the correspondence glowed right in front of him, like a sign on a highway. He leaned closer, feeling his heart suddenly falter, as if he had stumbled. The name at the top of the chat was Ryan Teacher. Tom blinked, trying to remember. Ryan. He heard this name a couple of times. Lisa mentioned it in passing when she talked about work. A young guy, a physical education teacher at her school, recently got a job. He's so funny, he jokes with the kids all the time, she said at dinner a couple of months ago, and Tom didn't pay any attention to it then. But now that name was staring at him from the screen, and underneath it was a chain of messages that stretched upward as far as his eyes could see. The first thing he saw was the last message sent yesterday at 21:43. "Are you home? Is everything okay?" Ryan wrote. Lisa's answer, 5 minutes later. "Yes, I just came in. I'm tired, but it was cool. Good night." Tom stared at the smiley face, feeling his throat go dry. It was cool. What was cool? Meeting. He swallowed, scrolling up the chat, fingers trembling on the touchpad. He didn't want to do this. I wanted to close my laptop, get up, go to the kitchen and forget. But the hands moved on their own, as if someone else was controlling them. A message 2 hours earlier at 7:30 p.m. "Meeting you at the Motel 6 on 71st. Room 12. Don't be late," from Ryan. Lisa's answer, "I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Tom froze, rereading. Motel 6 inches. He knew this place, a cheap diner on the outskirts of the city, which he passed when he went to a construction site in the neighboring county. Number 12. His brain latched on to this part like a nail and began to twist it until his head began to buzz. Motel, not school, not a meeting. Motel. He scrolled up. The chat was long, messages went on for days, weeks. "You looked great in that skirt today," Ryan wrote 3 days ago. "Thank you, I tried for you," Lisa answered with a winking smiley. Tom felt the blood rush to his face, and his chest became hot, as if from a blow. He read on, each word biting into him like a rusty knife. "I can't wait to see you again, Ryan, the day before yesterday." "Me too. These days drag on forever," Lisa. And then, 2 days ago. "Tom doesn't suspect anything. He's too busy with work. Everything is under control." Tom staggered away from the screen as if he had been hit. His heart was beating so hard that he could hear it in his ears, a dull, rapid knock, like a hammer on wood. He clenched his fists, his nails dug into his palms, but there was no pain, only this noise in his head, this heat. Tom doesn't suspect anything. She wrote this, Lisa, his wife, Ethan's mother, the woman with whom he shared this house, this life, these 10 years. She sat somewhere, maybe in the teacher's lounge, maybe at home while he was at a construction site, and typed these words, knowing that he was in the dark. He returned to the screen, scrolling further, almost on autopilot. Flirting. Hints. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in years, Ryan, a week ago. You too, Lisa." And plans. "Friday after work. Motel, he." "Yes, I'll say it's a meeting," she said. Tom stopped, his breathing hitched. Yesterday was Friday. She left at 6 and returned after 10. She said it was a meeting. And he believed. "I sat with Ethan, watched a stupid cartoon, ate the pizza I ordered so my son wouldn't whine about dinner, and she was there, with him, at the motel." He stood up abruptly so that the chair creaked and almost toppled over. His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists to stop the trembling, but it did not go away. He walked across the living room, from the sofa to the window and back, feeling how cold the floor was on his bare feet. Outside the window, the fog began to clear, and a faint light made its way through the curtains, falling onto the carpet. But inside it was dark, as if the lights had been turned off forever. He didn't know what to do. Scream, run upstairs, shake her, demand answers, smash that damn laptop against the wall. He stopped in the middle of the room, looking at the screen, which was still glowing, highlighting her words, her lies. Tom came back, sat down, rested his elbows on his knees, and held his head in his hands. My heart didn't stop, it was pounding, as if it wanted to break out. He tried to think, but his thoughts were confused. This is Lisa. Hi, Lisa. The one who baked him a cake for his birthday, even when he said he shouldn't. The one who cried when Ethan was born and held his hand so tightly it left bruises. The one who laughed at his stupid jokes about construction. And now this, Ryan, motel. Tom doesn't suspect anything. He didn't know how long he sat there. 5 minutes, 10. Time stretched out like rubber. The floorboard creaked upstairs as someone stood up. Lisa or Ethan. Tom abruptly closed the laptop, slamming the lid louder than he intended. He couldn't see her now. Couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. He got up, went to the kitchen, poured water from the tap into the first glass he came across and drank it in one gulp, but his mouth was still dry. He stood at the sink, staring into space, and felt like the world he knew was coming apart at the seams. Tom had been walking on pins and needles all day. After he closed his laptop in the morning, the world around him became somehow unreal, as if he was looking at everything through a cloudy glass. He was making coffee on the stove because the coffee maker was still dead, and nearly burned his hand when he spilled boiling water past the mug. Ethan came down to breakfast, sleepy and disheveled, and chatted about some comic book he was reading, but Tom barely heard him. He answered, "Aha," and "great," looking into space. Lisa appeared later in a dressing gown with a forced smile and said that today she had a lot to do, and in the evening there was a meeting again. Tom nodded without looking at her, feeling everything boiling inside. He couldn't lay it all out right there in front of Ethan, over a bowl of cereal and a glass of orange juice. But he knew that he could wait no longer. The day dragged on painfully long. Tom went to a construction site, but the work didn't go well. He mixed up the drawings twice and almost snapped at a worker who asked if everything was okay. He arrived home at 6. Lisa had already left, leaving a note on the refrigerator. "I'll be back late, don't wait up." Ethan sat in the living room with the pizza she ordered before leaving and watched another episode of Batman. Tom sat down with him, pretending to watch, but the piece of pizza stuck in his throat like cardboard. He waited. He waited for Ethan to yawn, rub his eyes, and say he was going to bed. He waited until his son's steps died down upstairs, until the light in his room went out under the door. I waited for Lisa to return. She entered the house at 11:15. Tom heard the key click in the lock and her bag plop onto the couch in the hallway. He sat on the sofa in the living room in the dark, only the faint light from the street lamp shining through the curtains. The TV was turned off, the pizza was cold on the table, and the box was still open. He didn't move, just looked towards the door, feeling his pulse beating in his temples. Lisa walked into the living room, turned on the light, and shuddered when she saw him. "God, Tom, you scared me," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. She was wearing the same cardigan as on Wednesday and jeans, and her hair was a little disheveled, as if she had been sitting in the car for a long time. She smiled, but the smile came out forced. "Why are you sitting in the dark? Is Ethan sleeping?" Tom nodded, slowly getting up from the couch. His legs felt like cotton, but he forced himself to stand. A voice inside screamed for him to start, but he still held on, checking. "Yes, I fell asleep an hour ago. Where have you been?" She shrugged, pulling off her cardigan and throwing it over the back of her chair. "Meeting, I told you so. The concert, the decorations, everything was delayed. Tired as a dog." She walked past him into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out a bottle of water. Her movements were fast, too fast, as if she wanted to avoid the conversation. Tom clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. He followed her and stopped at the kitchen door. A meeting, that is, Saturday evening. Until 11. Lisa froze, holding the bottle to her lips. She took a sip, slowly lowered it, and turned to him. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice remained level. "Yes, Tom. Teachers work on weekends too, you know." "What tone?" He stepped closer, feeling the heat rise to his face. "What tone? Ordinary. Just asking. Where have you been, Lisa?" She placed the bottle on the countertop and crossed her arms. I told you so. At the meeting. What's wrong with you? Tom laughed, short, harsh, almost like a cough. At the meeting, at Motel 6, right? Number 12? Her face changed. Her eyes widened and her lips parted slightly, but she quickly pulled herself together. What are you talking about? What motel? What are you even talking about? He stepped even closer, his voice shaking with rage that he could no longer contain. Don't lie to me, Lisa. I saw it. Signal. Your correspondence with Ryan. Flirting, motel, everything. Tom doesn't suspect anything, right? Well, now he suspects. Speak. She stepped back, resting her back against the sink. Her face turned pale, but she still tried to defend herself. Have you been rummaging through my things? Are you crazy? This is my phone, my personal telephone. Tom raised his voice, almost shouted, but restrained himself, remembering Ethan. No, it was a laptop. Family laptop. You left the chat open, Lisa. I didn't rummage, I just sat down to check my email, and there was all this crap. Are you sleeping with him? With Ryan? She was silent, looking at him like a hunted animal. Her hands were shaking, but she clenched them into fists, trying to hide them. You're delusional, Tom. It's just messages, jokes, nothing like that. Jokes. He hit the tabletop with his palm, the water bottle jumped and fell, rolling towards the edge. I'm waiting for you at motel number 12. Is this a joke? You looked great in a skirt. Is this a joke? You're lying to my face, Lisa. How long does it take? Month? 2? Lisa turned away, looking at the floor. Her shoulders shook, and Tom realized that she was going to cry. But he didn't care. He waited while the rage inside him burned like acid. Finally, she spoke, quietly, almost in a whisper. It's not what you think. What is this? He barked, losing control. What is this, Lisa? Are you dating him behind my back while I sit here with Ethan like an idiot? While you're lying to me about meetings? Tell the truth, damn it. She raised her head, her eyes were wet, tears were already streaming down her cheeks. Come on, yes, I'm dating Ryan. She shouted this, her voice broke, and immediately covered her mouth with her hand as if she was afraid of her words. It started 3 months ago. I didn't want it to happen like this. Tom recoiled as if he had been hit. 3 months. For 3 months she lied to him, smiled at him, slept next to him. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck, and instead he shouted, 3 months? Are you serious? You are a creature, Lisa. How could you? She began to sob, covering her face with her hands. Don't scream, Tom, please. I don't know how it happened. I'm tired. From everything. From us. From this house. Ryan, he's different. Another? Tom grabbed the chair that was standing by the table and threw it to the side. It hit the wall, leaving a dent in the drywall. You ruined everything because of some physics teacher? Do you even understand what you've done? Lisa cried, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain this. Tom walked around the kitchen like an animal in a cage, clenching and unclenching his fists. He wanted to hit something, break something, but he held back because he knew that if he started, he wouldn't stop. Sorry? Is that all you can say? You broke our family, Lisa, Ethan. Have you even thought about him? She raised her head, tears streaming down her chin, her voice trembling. Of course I thought. I didn't want him to find out. It's my mistake, Tom, mine. Scream all you want, but don't make it worse. Worse? He laughed, bitterly, almost madly. Worse than this. You sleep with someone else, and I have to keep quiet. Fuck you, Lisa. They shouted at each other, not noticing how the voices were spreading throughout the house. Without noticing that he was upstairs in his room, Ethan woke up. He lay in the dark, clutching the blanket to his chest, and listened to fragments, Ryan, motel, destroyed. His eyes were wide open, his heart was pounding, but he did not move, afraid to even breathe loudly. Downstairs, the kitchen was buzzing with screams while Tom and Lisa, out of control, saw nothing but their pain. The kitchen fell silent sometime after midnight when the screams of Tom and Lisa exhausted themselves, leaving only heavy silence and the smell of spilled water that no one had cleaned up. Lisa sat at the table with her head in her hands. Her face was wet with tears, and her voice was hoarse to a whisper. Tom stood at the sink, staring into space, feeling his rage slowly give way to something cold and heavy, like a concrete slab. The walls of the house seemed to have absorbed their words, and now the air was thick, almost tangible. He couldn't stay here. Not today. Not after this. "I'm leaving," he said finally, his voice low, as if all his strength had been squeezed out of him. Lisa raised her head. Her eyes were red, but she didn't say anything. She just stared, as if waiting for him to change his mind. But Tom had already turned and went upstairs without looking back. The bedroom greeted him with darkness and the smell of her perfume, light, floral, which he had always loved, but now it seemed alien to him. He turned on the light, squinting against the harsh brightness, and pulled from the closet an old black suitcase, the same one they had taken on a trip to Lake Erie 5 years ago. Then Ethan was little, running along the shore with a net, and Lisa laughed when Tom tried to light a fire in the rain. The suitcase was now covered in dust, sitting on the top shelf behind the boxes of Christmas decorations. Tom brushed off the dust with his sleeve, threw it on the bed, and began to get ready. He moved quickly, almost mechanically, not allowing himself to think. T-shirts, jeans, a couple of sweaters, everything that came to hand flew into the suitcase. He pulled the socks out of the dresser drawer, not caring whether they were a pair or not. Toothbrush, razor, deodorant, he stuffed them into his side pocket without even checking to see if the tube was closed. He didn't care. He just wanted to leave, to escape from this house, which suddenly became alien, as if the walls were laughing at him. His hand shook, but he did not stop, throwing things one after another until the suitcase was half full. He doesn't need any more. Let the rest stay here with her. Lisa appeared at the door as he zipped up. She stood leaning against the doorframe, still in the same t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, with disheveled hair. Her face was swollen from tears, but she was no longer crying. She just looked, silently, as if she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. "Where are you going?" she asked finally. Her voice was weak, almost lost. Tom didn't answer right away. He picked up his suitcase from the bed, checked his jeans pockets for his keys and wallet, and only then looked at her. "To the motel. I don't care which one. I can't be here." "Tom, wait." She stepped forward, extending her hand, but he recoiled as if struck. "No need, Lisa. Just don't." He walked past her, feeling her fingers lightly brush against his sleeve, but didn't stop. The descent down the stairs was fast. The steps echoed loudly in the silence. He grabbed his jacket from the rack in the hallway, put on his shoes without tying the laces, and opened the door. The cold night air hit his face, but he didn't even feel it. The suitcase hit the threshold as he pulled it out. Lisa stayed in the house. She didn't follow him, didn't shout, didn't try to stop him. She just stood in the doorway, watching him get into his Ford, the headlights flashing in the darkness of Maple Street. Tom started the engine, threw the suitcase in the back seat, and drove out of the yard without looking in the mirror. He didn't want to see her silhouette, didn't want to see the house. He just drove, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The road was empty, only rare streetlights cast yellow spots on the asphalt. He didn't know where he was going until he saw the Motel 6 sign on Route 71, the same one he'd read about in her messages. The irony hit him like a slap in the face, but he turned there anyway. Maybe it was some kind of sick desire to be where she was with him, with Ryan, to understand how far everything had gone. Or just tired. He parked at the reception, took the key to room 14, not 12, thank God, at least it was, and collapsed on the bed without even undressing. The mattress smelled like cheap laundry detergent, and the sheets were hard, but he didn't care. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Only her words were spinning in my head. 3 months. I'm tired. He's different. Morning came too quickly. Gray light filtered through the thin curtains, and Tom woke up with a pain in his neck and an emptiness in his chest. He sat up on the bed, rubbed his face with his hands, and looked at the clock. 7:15. Ethan should have woken up by now and got ready for school. Tom couldn't leave him without an explanation. He couldn't just disappear like he never existed. He pulled the phone out of his pocket. The battery was at 10%, but that would be enough, and dialed his home number. The phone was picked up after the third ring. Hello? Ethan's voice was sleepy, slightly hoarse, as if he had just gotten up. Hey, champion, Tom said, trying to sound calm, even though his throat was tight. This is Dad. How are you? Ethan paused, then answered, Fine. Where are you? Mom said you left. Tom swallowed, looking at the peeling paint on the motel wall. Yes, I need to live separately for a while. Not for long. Just stuff at work, stuff. He hated himself for this lie, but could not tell the truth. Not now. Not by phone. Ethan was silent. Tom heard his breathing in the receiver, quiet, even, but tense. Will you come back? He asked finally, almost in a whisper. Tom closed his eyes, feeling something inside him breaking. Of course, I'll be back. Just not today. I'll call you, okay? We'll go somewhere and go fishing, just like you wanted. He tried to smile, although he knew Ethan wouldn't see it. Okay, Ethan said, but there was nothing in his voice, no joy, no anger, just emptiness. Mom's calling, I have to go. Fine. I love you, son, Tom said, but the receiver was already beeping with short beeps. Ethan hung up without answering. Tom dropped the phone on the bed, looking at the ceiling. He imagined Ethan at home, standing in the kitchen in his Batman pajamas, with the phone in his hand, looking at Lisa, who was probably making him toast and pretending that everything was fine. He didn't understand. Of course I didn't understand. He is 10 years old. He should not understand why Dad suddenly left, why Mom cried at night, why everything that was normal fell apart overnight. The morning in the house on Maple Street began with a silence that had never happened before. Lisa woke up at 7 when the alarm clock on her phone vibrated on the nightstand, but she did not immediately open her eyes. The bed was cold on the side where Tom usually slept, the sheet rumpled but empty. She lay looking at the ceiling, feeling the weight of last night pressing down on her chest like wet sand. Screams, tears, slamming the door, all this was spinning in my head like a jammed recording. She swallowed, trying to clear away the dryness in her mouth, and forced herself to stand. It was impossible to lie down. Ethan will wake up soon. We must control ourselves. She pulled on a robe, an old blue robe with faded flowers that Tom had once called Grandma's, laughing as they drank coffee in the backyard. Now it seemed distant, like someone else's life. Lisa went down to the kitchen, barefoot, feeling the cold floor creeping through her skin. The light was dim, rain was drizzling outside the window, drops knocked on the glass, leaving blurry marks. She turned on the light, took out a box of cereal from the cupboard, a bowl, and milk from the refrigerator, all automatically, as if it were a normal Monday. But there was nothing ordinary. The table seemed too big without Tom. His chair was as empty as a broken tooth. Yesterday's dent in the wall from the chair looked at her like a silent reproach. Lisa heard footsteps upstairs. Ethan woke up. She quickly wiped her eyes with her sleeve, although there were no tears, only dry redness from a sleepless night. He can't be seen. She put on a smile, weak but believable enough, and turned towards the stairs as he descended. Ethan was in his Batman pajamas. His hair was sticking out in all directions. His eyes were still sleepy. He silently walked to the table, sat down, and reached for the cereal. "Good morning, sunshine," said Lisa, trying to sound cheerful. She poured milk into his bowl and placed the spoon next to him. "Did you sleep well?" Ethan nodded without looking up. "Yes." He scooped up some cereal and put it in his mouth, but chewed it slowly, as if without interest. Lisa looked at him, feeling her heart squeezing. He didn't ask about Tom. He didn't say anything about the call in the morning. She heard the phone ringing, Ethan speaking quietly into the receiver, but she didn't interfere. She wanted to ask what Dad said, but she couldn't help herself. Instead, she poured herself coffee black, without sugar, from a can of instant coffee, because the coffee maker was still broken. "Do you have an extended day today?" she asked, sitting down opposite him with a mug. Her voice was even, but her fingers trembled as she clutched the hot ceramic. Yes, Ethan muttered, looking into the bowl. He picked at the cereal without raising his head, and Lisa noticed how his shoulders were slightly tense. She wanted to reach out and stroke his head like before, but she stopped. Something about his silence kept her at a distance. He finished eating in silence, stood up, took the bowl to the sink, and went upstairs to change clothes. Lisa remained seated, looking at Tom's empty chair. Her eyes stung, but she blinked it away. I had to get ready for work. I had to move on with my life, pretend that everything was fine. She got up, washed the dishes, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a mug, and went to get dressed. Half an hour later, he and Ethan left the house. She drove him to school, and he was silent the whole way, looking out the window as the rain pattered on the glass of the Honda. Lisa said, "See you this evening," when he got out, but he just nodded and left, hunched over under his backpack. Ethan's school, Lincoln Elementary School, was 3 miles away, a low red brick building with a playground in the back and a flagpole at the entrance. The children were already crowding at the door when Ethan entered, their voices buzzing like a swarm of bees. Usually, he would immediately find Mike, his best friend, and they would run to the swing set or the basketball hoop until the bell rang to hear everyone inside. But today, he walked past Mike without even noticing how he waved his hand. Ethan lowered his head, clutched the straps of his backpack, and walked toward the classroom without looking around. The lesson started with mathematics. Miss Johnson, his teacher, stood at the blackboard, explaining fractions. She was young, about 30, with short brown hair and an ever-kind smile. Ethan sat in the third row, next to the window where the raindrops flowed down like little rivers. He usually raised his hand to answer questions, not because he liked math, but because he liked it when Miss Johnson praised him in front of the class. But today he was silent, looking at the notebook, where the pencil had left only a couple of crooked lines. Miss Johnson noticed this, glanced in his direction, but continued the lesson, deciding not to interfere. The change came an hour later. The children poured out into the yard. Despite the dampness, the rain had eased, leaving puddles on the asphalt and wet grass. Mike ran up to Ethan, poking him in the shoulder. "Hey, let's go on the swing. Yesterday, I almost made it to the crossbar. Do you want to see it?" Ethan shook his head, shoving his hands into the pockets of his hoodie. "Don't want to. Go yourself." His voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise of the other children. Mike frowned, but shrugged his shoulders and ran to the swing, where the guys were already crowding. Ethan remained standing against the wall, looking at his sneakers, the gray Nikes that Tom bought him before school. They were slightly wet from the puddles, and he kicked a pebble, watching as it rolled towards the bench. He was usually in the middle of everything, playing dodgeball, racing with friends, laughing when someone fell into the mud. But today he just stood there, feeling his insides shrink, as if someone had turned off the light. Miss Johnson watched this from the staff room window, holding a cup of tea in her hands. She saw how Ethan walked away from his friends, how he stood alone, looking at the ground. She had known him since the beginning of the year, a loud, cheerful boy who always drew Batman in the margins of his notebooks and argued with her about her homework. But today he was different, quiet, less. She frowned, took a sip of tea, but decided not to bother yet. Maybe it's a bad day. Maybe he had a fight with someone. She had seen this before. Children change, then return to normal. But something in his figure, in this loneliness against the wall, pricked her. She remembered this, but the bell brought her back to her lessons. At home, Lisa tried to keep up the facade. She returned from work at 5, picked Ethan up from after-school care, and turned on the "everything is fine" mode. She put frozen lasagna on to warm up and turned on the radio. The local station was playing old rock music, which Tom loved, but she didn't turn it off, she just turned it down. Ethan sat at the table doing his homework, but was silent. Lisa noticed how he glanced at her face when she was putting down the plates and quickly turned away. Her eyes were red. She cried in the car on the way home. She couldn't help it, but she thought that the mascara had hidden the marks. Obviously not. "How was school?" she asked, placing the lasagna in front of him. Her voice was a little higher than usual, too cheerful. "Okay," Ethan answered without looking at her. He picked at his food with a fork, but barely ate. Lisa sat down opposite, feeling the silence oppressive. She wanted to say something to explain, to reassure, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she smiled, weakly, and said, "Tomorrow I'll make your favorite pancakes, okay?" Ethan nodded but didn't answer. He finished eating with all his might, went into the living room, and turned on the TV. Lisa remained in the kitchen, looking at his empty plate, and felt tears burning her eyes again. She was pretending, but he saw. He knew something was wrong, even if he didn't understand what it was. Wednesday morning started as usual at Lincoln High School. Children made noise in the corridors, backpacks clattered against their backs, voices shouted over each other until the bell sent everyone to their classrooms. Ethan sat in his seat in the third row near the window, where the glass was slightly cloudy with age. He was wearing a long-sleeved sweatshirt, dark blue, and jeans that Lisa had washed the day before. His backpack lay under his desk, open, with a math notebook sticking out. He didn't sleep well at night. He woke up from the sound of rain drumming on the roof and lay for a long time, looking into the darkness, thinking about why Dad didn't call yesterday, as he promised. Fatigue sat in his bones, but he was silent, as he had been silent for the last days. Miss Johnson stood at the blackboard, the chalk squeaking against the black surface as she drew a circle and divided it into sections. Today was a lesson on fractions, the second one this week, and she was explaining how half can be divided in half. Her voice was soft but insistent, and she loved it when children understood and didn't just nod. The class was noisy, someone was whispering, someone was drawing in the margins, but she did not pay attention until it disturbed her. Ethan looked at the board but didn't see it. His pencil lay on the desk, untouched, and his fingers fiddled with the edge of his notebook, tearing off small pieces of paper that fell to the floor like snow. "Ethan," Miss Johnson said, turning to him. She noticed his silence from the beginning of the lesson, but decided to pull him into work. "If I divide half the pie into two more parts, how much of the whole will it be? Can you count?" Ethan raised his head and blinked. Her face was kind, her eyes slightly narrowed, as if she was waiting for him to smile and answer as before. But he just shrugged his shoulders, muttering quietly, "I don't know." His voice was barely audible, lost in the noise of the class. Miss Johnson nodded without insisting and turned to the board. "Okay, let's try it together." She began, but was interrupted by a laugh from the back row. There sat Trevor, a broad-shouldered boy with freckles and a smirk that always appeared when he sensed a chance to pick on someone. He leaned over to his neighbor, Josh, and whispered, but loud enough for anyone to hear, "Ethan doesn't know because he has half the family now. Dad ran away, Mom is crying, here are the fractions for you." The class froze for a second, then someone giggled, someone whispered. Trevor sat back in his chair, pleased with himself, waiting for a reaction. He didn't know everything, just bits and pieces of rumors he'd picked up from his older brother, whose friend lived on Maple Street and had seen Tom leave with a suitcase. But that was enough. Ethan felt the blood rush to his face. His ears began to ring, his heart began to pound, as if someone had hit him in the chest. He turned to Trevor, clenching his fists under the desk. "Shut up," he said quietly, but his voice was shaking. Trevor grinned wider. "Does it really hurt your eyes? Now your dad is in a motel, and your mom." He didn't finish. Ethan jumped up, the chair behind him flying back with a crash, hitting the desk behind him. The class gasped. Miss Johnson turned around, but did not have time to say anything. Ethan grabbed the chair with both hands, his thin arms tense, his face red with rage. He didn't think, he just picked up his chair and threw it at the wall, towards the blackboard where the drawings from the previous lesson hung. The chair hit with a crash, the leg broke off, and the plaster fell into fine dust on the floor. The silence collapsed, replaced by screams and noise. "Ethan!" Miss Johnson shouted, rushing towards him. She grabbed him by the shoulders, but he broke free, retreating to the window. His chest heaved, his eyes sparkled, but he did not cry. He only looked at Trevor, who now sat silently, eyes wide open. "Take him away," Ethan snapped, pointing at Trevor with a trembling hand. "He's lying. He lies about everything. Miss Johnson raised her hands in an attempt to calm. Ethan, please sit down. We'll figure it out. Trevor, be quiet. Her voice trembled. She didn't expect this. She'd seen breakdowns, children fighting, screaming, but Ethan was always quiet, even when he argued. And now he stood at the window, clenching his fists, and looked as if he was ready to break the glass. The class was buzzing. The children were whispering. Some were giggling. Some were staring with their mouths open. Miss Johnson turned to them. Everyone sits quietly. Open your textbooks, page 42. Now. She rarely raised her voice, and it had an effect. The noise died down, although her eyes still darted to Ethan. She approached him, softer but firm. Ethan, come with me. Into the corridor. We need to talk. He didn't move, looking at the floor, but when she touched his shoulder, he didn't resist. She led him out of the classroom, closing the door, leaving the buzz of voices behind. The corridor was silent, only the echo of their footsteps reflected from the lockers. Miss Johnson crouched down in front of him, looking him in the face. Ethan, what happened? Can you tell me? He was silent, compressing his lips. His hands were still shaking, but he hid them in his pockets. Finally, he squeezed out. He said about Dad. And Mom, this is not true. Miss Johnson frowned, but did not press. She saw his last day's silence, detachment, empty gaze. Now this, she sighed. Fine, we'll deal with Trevor. But you can't throw a chair, you understand? You could have hurt someone. Ethan nodded, but didn't answer. He looked at the floor, at his sneakers, where the lace had come untied. Miss Johnson straightened up. Let's go to the teacher's room. You sit there while I call my mom. He followed her, slowly, as if his legs were lead. The teacher's room was small, with a sofa littered with papers and a coffee table with a cup of cold tea. Ethan sat in the corner, hunched over, while Miss Johnson called Lisa from the phone on the table. Lisa was at her school, 3 miles away, when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She was teaching a 4th grade class painting spring flowers, and her voice was steady as she explained how to mix paints. But when she saw Ethan's school number, she froze. Keep drawing, I'll go out for a minute, she told the children and stepped into the corridor, closing the door. Hello? Her voice was tense, her fingers clenched the phone. Mrs. Clark, this is Miss Johnson, Ethan's teacher. The voice on the other end was calm but serious. We have an incident here. Ethan threw his chair in class. No one was hurt, but he was very upset. You need to come. Lisa felt the floor disappear from under her feet. Her heart began to pound. Her throat went dry. What? Threw a chair? Why? She pressed her hand to her forehead, trying to comprehend. It was after the other boy said something about your family. About divorce, it seems. Ethan lost his temper. I think it's hard for him now. Come, please. Lisa nodded, although Miss Johnson could not see her. Yes, I'll be right there. Thank you. She hung up, feeling tears burning her eyes. Divorce. The word cut her like a knife. She and Tom hadn't said the word, but it was already in the air, and Ethan, he knew, or felt it. She returned to the classroom, packed her bag with trembling hands, told her aide she needed to leave, and ran out to the car. The drive to Ethan's school took 15 minutes, but felt like an eternity. The rain started again, the windshield wipers squealed on the glass, and she drove, squeezing the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She was terrified. Ethan, her boy, threw a chair. Because of them. Because of her. She remembered his silence at breakfast, his look at her red eyes. He saw everything, felt everything, and she pretended that nothing was happening. When she entered the staff room, Ethan was sitting on the couch, looking at the floor. Miss Johnson stood up to meet her, but Lisa looked only at her son. His face was pale, his eyes dry but empty. She came up and knelt down in front of him. Ethan, honey, what happened? Her voice trembled. She extended her hand, but he moved away. Nothing, he muttered, without looking at her. Trevor is just stupid. Lisa swallowed, feeling a lump growing in her throat. She didn't know what to say, how to approach. Miss Johnson touched her shoulder gently. Maybe take him home today. He needs time. Lisa nodded, but everything inside was screaming. She stood up, took his backpack, and they walked to the car. Ethan was silent, following her like a shadow. She wanted to hug him and ask him, but she couldn't. She was afraid of what he would say, afraid of the truth he already knew. The staff room at Lincoln High School was a small, cramped room that smelled of coffee and old books. The walls were painted a pale beige, worn in places, with faded rules of conduct posters and motivational quotes like, "Every day is a new chance." The sofa in the corner, upholstered in gray fabric stained with spilled tea, sagged under the weight of Ethan, who sat there hunched over with his hands in the pockets of his sweatshirt. His sneakers, gray Nikes with laces untied, barely touched the floor, and his backpack lay nearby, carelessly tossed, with a notebook sticking out. Lisa stood in front of him, still holding the bag in her hands, her fingers squeezing the leather handles so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had just arrived. Her hair was a little disheveled from the wind and rain, and her eyes were red, despite attempts to hide it with mascara. Miss Johnson closed the staff room door, clicking the lock so they wouldn't be interrupted. She was in her usual outfit, a dark green knee-length skirt, a white blouse with rolled-up sleeves, and comfortable shoes that didn't click on the linoleum. Her short brown hair was slightly disheveled from running around the classroom, and in her hands she was holding a cup of cold tea, which she placed on the coffee table next to the sofa. She looked at Lisa, then at Ethan, and her face softened, but there was concern in her eyes. "Mrs. Clark, thank you for coming so quickly," she began, her voice soft but firm, like that of someone accustomed to calming chaos. She nodded to the chair at the table, old, with a shabby back. "Please sit down. We need to talk." Lisa nodded, but did not immediately sit down. She looked at Ethan, who still hadn't looked up, and her throat tightened. "Ethan, honey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound calm. She stepped towards him, holding out her hand, but he moved away, pressing himself deeper into the sofa. "I'm fine," he muttered, looking at the floor. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise of the rain outside the window, but there was a feeling of a wall in it. Lisa froze, lowered her hand, and swallowed. She didn't know how to get through to him, how to get even a word out. Her chest tightened with fear and guilt, but she turned to Miss Johnson and forced herself to sit up. The chair creaked beneath her, and she placed her bag on her lap like a shield. "What happened?" she asked, looking at the teacher. "You said he threw the chair. For what?" Miss Johnson sat down on the edge of the table with her arms crossed. She glanced at Ethan, then back at Lisa. "It was in math class, about 40 minutes ago. We were studying fractions, and I noticed that Ethan wasn't with us today. He sat quietly and did not answer, although he is usually active. Then one boy, Trevor, said something. About your family. About my parents' divorce." Ethan lost his temper. He stood up, grabbed a chair, and threw it at the wall. "No one was hurt, but it was unexpected. I brought him here to calm down." Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. The word divorce hit her like a slap in the face. She clutched the bag tighter, her nails digging into her skin. "Divorce," she repeated quietly, almost in a whisper, and looked at Ethan. Did he, did he hear that? "From whom?" Miss Johnson shook her head. "I don't know for sure. Children pick up rumors from brothers, sisters, neighbors. We're a small town, you understand. Trevor seemed to just want to tease. He does that often." But Ethan's reaction, it was strong. He shouted for Trevor to be removed and said that he was lying. I didn't bother to sort it out in front of the whole class, but it clearly hurt him. Lisa closed her eyes for a second, feeling the tears burning again. She remembered his silence at home, his look at her red eyes, his aha on the phone with Tom. He knew. Not everything, maybe, but I felt it. And now it came out in the classroom, in front of everyone. She opened her eyes and looked at Miss Johnson. I don't know what to say. He never did such a thing. He's quiet. He's a good boy." "I know," Miss Johnson said, her voice softening. She leaned a little closer, resting her hands on the table. "Ethan is one of the best in the class. Smart, kind, always helps if someone does not understand the task. That's why I was surprised. He's not the type to snap. But the last few days, I saw that he had changed. He became quieter and moved away from his friends. Today at recess, he just stood against the wall, didn't even play with Mike. And then this explosion. Lisa swallowed, her fingers trembling on the bag. Do you think it's because of us? Because, at home, she didn't want to say it out loud, not in front of Ethan, but the words came out on their own. Miss Johnson looked at her carefully, then glanced at Ethan, who was still silent, looking at the floor. I'm not a psychologist, Mrs. Clark, but I've been working with children for 8 years. When something changes at home, quarrels, moves, divorces, children feel it. They don't always talk, but it comes out. Sometimes like today. Ethan. He seemed to be keeping it to himself, and Trevor just pushed the wrong button. Lisa nodded, but everything inside was screaming. She felt guilt like a heavy stone on her chest. This she did. She and Tom. Her affair with Ryan, her lies, their screams in the kitchen. Ethan heard them. She remembered how loud they were yelling, how the chair hit the wall, how she cried. She thought he was sleeping, but he wasn't sleeping. And now at school, a chair, shouting in front of the class. Her son, her boy, broke down because of her. What should I do? She asked, her voice breaking. She looked at Miss Johnson, searching for some kind of answer. I don't know how to talk to him. He is silent at home and pushes me away. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, but he saw. Miss Johnson sighed and rubbed her neck, where the muscles were stiff from tension. I understand it's hard. But kids like Ethan, they can't always say what they feel. He's angry, maybe afraid, but doesn't know how to express it. You need to give him time, but also talk. Don't pretend, but be honest. Not everything, of course, she lowered her voice, glancing at Ethan, but something that he will understand. That dad left for a while, that you will sort it out, and maybe it's worth showing it to someone. A child psychologist, for example. Lisa blinked. The word psychologist struck her. Do you think he needs a psychologist? She pursed her lips, feeling panic rising. He's not. He's not crazy. He's just upset. I'm not saying he's crazy, Miss Johnson said quickly, raising her hand. He's a good boy. But what's happening at home, it's more than he can bear alone. A psychologist is not a punishment, it is a help. I've seen how it works. We had a girl a couple of years ago. Her parents were getting divorced. She started fighting during recess. After several meetings with a psychologist, she calmed down. Ethan is not alone. Lisa was silent, looking at her hands. Psychologist. It seemed to her that this was something distant, for other families, not for them. She and Tom were ordinary home, work, son. But now everything was falling apart, and she didn't know how to put the pieces back together. She looked at Ethan, who was still sitting like a statue, and her heart sank. I'll think about it, she said quietly. I don't want him to suffer. Nobody wants to, Miss Johnson said, her voice warm but serious. You are his mother, you know him best. But if it closes, you need to find a way to open the door. And maybe talk to your husband, so that Ethan can see that you are deciding something together, even if you don't live under the same roof. Lisa shuddered when she heard about Tom. She hasn't spoken to him since that night, only a short message yesterday. Ethan was asking about you. He didn't answer. She didn't know where he was, what he thought, whether he would return. But Miss Johnson was right. Ethan needed to see something stable. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I will try. Thank you for calling. I didn't expect it. Miss Johnson smiled, faintly but sincerely. This is my job. Ethan is not a stranger to me. I want him to be okay. Take him home today and let him rest. I'll talk to Trevor and his parents so this doesn't happen again. Lisa stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to hold on. Fine. Thank you. She turned to Ethan and gently touched his shoulder. Let's go, honey. Let's go home. He didn't answer, but stood up, took his backpack, and followed her. Miss Johnson watched them go until the door closed and remained in the staff room, looking at her cup of tea. She knew this was just the beginning for Ethan, for Lisa, for their family. And Lisa, walking to the car in the rain, felt the teacher's words echoing in her head, but did not know where to start. After talking with Miss Johnson, Lisa couldn't get her words out of her head. They played like a haunting tune as she drove home in the rain, while she made dinner boxed macaroni and cheese, which Ethan loved while she sat at the table, looking at his blank gaze. Child psychologist. It sounded foreign, distant, as if her son was broken and in need of repair. But she saw him, she saw how he was silent, how he pushed her away, how he threw a chair at school. She could no longer pretend that everything would work itself out. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, she sat on the living room couch, phone in hand, scrolling through local psychologists' websites. The light from the screen fell on her face, highlighting the shadows under her eyes, which she did not have time to cover with foundation. Her fingers trembled as she read reviews, compared names, and searched for someone who wouldn't scare her boy even more. She settled on Dr. Emily Green. There was a photo on the website of a woman in her 40s, with a warm smile, brown hair pulled back into a low ponytail, and kind eyes behind thin framed glasses. Specialist in childhood trauma, family conflict, and emotional regulation, the caption read. The reviews were good. Helped my son after a divorce, very gentle approach. Children love her. Lisa swallowed, feeling her heart pounding. It was right. Ethan needs this. She dialed the number and made an appointment for Friday morning 2 days after the incident at school. The voice on the other end, calm and businesslike, confirmed the time, 10 in the morning. Lisa hung up the phone, feeling both relieved and afraid. She took a step, but didn't know where it would lead. Friday morning arrived with a pale sun breaking through the clouds. Lisa got up early, made coffee on the stove, the coffee maker was still dead on the kitchen counter, and woke Ethan at 8:30. He came down in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, and sat down at the table, where there was already a bowl of cereal. Lisa watched him as she poured herself a second mug, feeling her nerves stretch like strings. She didn't want to talk about the psychologist too early. She was afraid that he would shut down even more, but time was running out. Ethan, she began, sitting down opposite him with a mug in her hands. Her voice was soft, but trembled slightly. Today we will go somewhere after breakfast. It's not long, just talk to one woman. She helps children when they are having a hard time. Ethan froze, the spoon of cereal stopping halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, looking up for the first time that morning, and frowned. For what? His voice was quiet, but there was a sense of wariness in it. Lisa squeezed the mug, feeling the heat burn her palms. Because you haven't been the same lately. After what happened at school, I want you to feel better. She's good, Ethan. Her name is Dr. Green. Just talk, that's all. He lowered the spoon into the bowl, and the milk splashed onto the table. I don't want to, he said, looking away. I'm not sick. It's because of Trevor, not because of me. I know it's not because of you, Lisa said quickly, leaning towards him. You're not sick, honey. This is not a punishment. It's just. We all need help sometimes, even me. She tried to smile, but the smile came out weak, almost broken. Ethan was silent, fiddling with the edge of his pajamas. His fingers squeezed the fabric, crumpled it, as if he wanted to hide in it. Finally, he nodded, barely, and went back to his cereal, but he ate slowly, without appetite. Lisa exhaled, feeling the tension release slightly. He agreed. This is already something. They left the house at 9:40. Lisa put on jeans and a gray sweater. Ethan put on his blue sweatshirt and the same Nikes with an untied lace. The drive to Dr. Green's office took 20 minutes. It was in a small building on the outskirts of Columbus, with a white sign and a neat parking lot where a couple of cars were already parked. Lisa parked the Honda at the entrance, turned off the engine, and looked at Ethan. He sat looking out the window, his hands clasped in his lap. Let's go, she said softly, opening the door. It won't be long. Ethan climbed out silently, slamming the door harder than necessary. They entered the building and climbed to the second floor along a narrow staircase with threadbare carpet. Dr. Green's office was at the end of the hallway, a light wood door with a sign that read, Emily Green, PsyD. Lisa knocked, and a second later the door opened. Dr. Green looked almost exactly like she did in the photo, only a little taller than Lisa expected. She was wearing a cream blouse, dark trousers, and glasses that had slipped down to the tip of her nose. Her hair was pulled back into the same low ponytail, and her smile was warm, but not cloying. "You must be Lisa and Ethan," she said, her voice soft and slightly hoarse. "Please come in." The room was small but cozy. The walls were painted light blue. On one there hung a board with children's drawings, flowers, houses, some abstract lines. There was a table with a laptop and a stack of papers by the window. Next to it were two armchairs upholstered in gray fabric and a low sofa with multicolored pillows. On the floor there was a carpet with a pattern in the shape of stars, and in the corner there was a basket with toys. Cars, blocks, a soft bear with a worn nose. The light streamed through the large window, softened by the white curtains, and the room smelled of something light, like lavender. "Sit down wherever you feel comfortable," Dr. Green said, pointing to the chairs and sofa. She sat down in a chair at the table, putting the notebook on her lap. "Ethan, do you want to grab something to play with? There are cars in the basket." Ethan shook his head, sat down on the couch, and tucked his hands into the sleeves of his sweatshirt. Lisa settled into a chair nearby, feeling her palms sweating. She looked at Dr. Green, trying to figure out where to start. "Thank you for receiving us so quickly," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. I I don't know how to explain. At home, there are difficulties. Ethan, he's different." Dr. Green nodded, her gaze calm and attentive. "Tell me what's happening. Whatever you think is important. Ethan, if you want to add anything, just say so, okay?" Lisa swallowed, glancing at her son. He sat silently, looking at his lap, his fingers fiddling with the sleeve of his sweatshirt, squeezing the fabric. She began to speak quietly, but gradually her voice became stronger. "My husband, Tom, he left a few days ago. We had a quarrel. Big. Ethan probably heard. And then at school, he threw a chair. His teacher said that he closed himself off and did not play with his friends. I don't know how to help him." Dr. Green wrote something down on her notepad in small, neat handwriting, then looked at Ethan. "Ethan, do you want to say something about this? About what's happening at home or at school?" He didn't answer. He just squeezed his sleeve tighter. His fingers moved nervously, fiddling with the seam until the thread began to come out. Dr. Green didn't press. She simply nodded and turned to Lisa. "It's normal that he is silent. The first time is always like this. He needs to get used to it. Tell us a little more. What does he do at home?" Lisa sighed, rubbing her hands. "He's quiet. He eats little, watches TV, but doesn't seem to see it. He does his homework, but in silence. He used to talk non-stop about Batman, about his friends. And now, nothing. I tried to speak, but he pushed me away." Dr. Green listened without interrupting. Her face remained calm, but her eyes followed every word. When Lisa fell silent, she put her pen on the notepad and leaned a little closer. "Thank you, Lisa. This helps to understand. Ethan is going through something big, and he doesn't know how to let it out yet. We will work on this slowly. Today, I just want him to feel safe here." She turned to Ethan, her voice becoming even softer. "Ethan, there are no right or wrong answers here. You can remain silent if you want. But if you want to say something, I'll listen. Okay?" He nodded, barely noticeably, without raising his eyes. His fingers kept fiddling with his sleeve, and Dr. Green noticed this. She stood up, went to the table, and took a pack of paper and a box of pencils, plain, colored, with slightly sharpened ends. She returned to the couch and placed them next to Ethan. "I came up with something," she said, squatting down in front of him. "It's hard to talk, right? But there are other ways to tell what's inside you. Do you like to draw?" Ethan shrugged, but his gaze slid to the pencils. Dr. Green smiled. "At home, when you have time, try to draw something. Whatever you feel, whatever you see, whatever you want. You don't have to show it to anyone if you don't want to. Just take paper and draw, and next time you can bring it if you decide." "Fine." He nodded, a little stronger than before, but was still silent. Dr. Green stood up and looked at Lisa. "This is the beginning, Lisa. Give him time, and try it yourself at home. Sit down with him and draw together. Don't ask, just be there. Lisa nodded, feeling tears burning in her eyes, but she held back. Fine, I will try. Thank you. The session ended after half an hour. Ethan picked up one pencil blue, his favorite color, and put it in his pocket when Dr. Green said it was okay. He and Lisa left the office and went down to the car. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and smelled of wet grass. Ethan sat in the back seat, looking out the window, and Lisa started the engine, feeling hope and fear mixing inside her. It was a step. Small, but a step. A week had passed since her first session with Dr. Emily Green, and Lisa was still feeling on edge. The days passed slowly, as if time stood still in some sticky fog. She tried to follow the doctor's advice, buying a pack of paper from Walmart, a box of crayons, even the glitter markers that Ethan had loved in elementary school. All this lay on the kitchen table, next to the fruit bowl, which now contained only one wrinkled apple. She sat down with him a couple of times, took a pencil, drew flowers or just lines, hoping that he would join. But Ethan was silent, looked at the paper as if it were someone else's thing, and went into his room. Lisa did not insist. She was afraid that the pressure would make it worse, but each of his departures left an emptiness in her, as if she was losing him in pieces. Wednesday night, after a dinner of chicken nuggets and fries, she noticed Ethan hiding something. He was sitting on the couch, looking at the TV, where the next episode of Batman was playing, but his hands were under the pillow, squeezing something. Lisa walked past, pretending to clear away the plates, and out of the corner of her eye she saw a corner of paper white, slightly crumpled. Her heart skipped a beat. He was drawing. Not in front of her, not in the kitchen, but he was drawing. She didn't ask, she just washed the dishes, turned off the light, and went to bed, feeling a faint spark of hope. Maybe Dr. Green was right. Maybe this is the beginning. The next session was scheduled for Friday, at the same time, 10 in the morning. Lisa woke Ethan up at 9, and he came downstairs wearing the same blue sweatshirt, but with a different t-shirt, black, with a faded Lego logo. Breakfast passed in silence. Cereal with milk for him, coffee for her. She noticed that he had taken a piece of paper with him, folded in half, and stuffed it into his sweatshirt pocket when he thought she wasn't looking. Lisa didn't say anything, but her fingers trembled as she tied the laces of her sneakers. What did he draw? Something about Batman, school, or something else? The walk to Dr. Green's office was quiet. The radio in the Honda was playing the old Eurythmics hit Sweet Dreams, but Lisa turned it off, leaving only the noise of the engine and the rustle of tires on the asphalt. Ethan sat in the back, looking out the window where suburban houses with neat lawns and maple trees wet with morning dew floated by. His hands lay on his knees, but his right hand kept touching his pocket as if checking if the paper was in place. Lisa squeezed the steering wheel tighter, feeling her nerves tighten. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew it was important. They entered the office exactly at 10. Dr. Green greeted them at the door like last time, with the same warm smile. Today she was wearing a gray turtleneck and dark blue trousers, her glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. "Good morning, Lisa, Ethan," she said, stepping aside. "Come in, feel at home." The room has not changed. Light blue walls, a carpet with stars, a basket with toys in the corner. The sun streamed through the window, casting soft shadows on the cushioned sofa. Lisa sat down in the same chair as last time, placing her bag on her lap, and Ethan settled down on the couch, a little closer to the edge than before. His hands were in his pockets, but Lisa noticed how the paper was sticking out of one. The corner was white against the background of the dark fabric. Dr. Green sat down in her chair at the table, took a notepad and pen, but did not open it right away. She looked at Ethan. Her gaze was soft, unobtrusive. "Ethan, how was your week? Have you thought about what we talked about? About drawing?" He nodded, barely noticeably, and pulled the paper out of his pocket. His movements were slow, hesitant, as if he was unsure whether to show. The sheet was folded in half. The edges were slightly wrinkled, but when he unfolded it and laid it on the sofa, Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. It was a drawing. Not neat, not perfect, but full of details, drawn with colored pencils so forcefully that in places the paper was slightly torn. On the left side of the sheet, there was a figure of a woman Lisa recognized herself immediately. Yellow hair, long like hers, a gray jacket, similar to the one she wore at home. Next to her was a man tall, with short brown hair, wearing a red t-shirt. They were holding hands. The lines drawn between their fingers were thick, almost black, as if Ethan was pressing down on the pencil with all his might. To the right, on the edge of the paper, there was another figure, a man in a dark blue sweater, with dark hair like Tom's. He stood with his back, walking towards the black stripe that occupied the entire right corner of the drawing, darkness, drawn in black and blue, with sharp strokes like a storm. There was an emptiness between them, white, pure, but it seemed heaviest of all. Dr. Green leaned closer, her glasses sliding down slightly, but she didn't adjust them. She examined the drawing silently, carefully, then looked at Ethan. "That's great, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice as warm as the sunlight in the room. "You did a good job. Do you want to tell me who's here?" Ethan pursed his lips and his fingers found the sleeve of his hoodie again and began to fiddle with it. He was silent, looking at the drawing, as if he was afraid that he would speak himself. Lisa sat motionless, feeling her heart pounding. She knew who it was. Mom is she, Dad Tom, leaving, and this man, this alien uncle. Her stomach clenched, a chill ran down her spine. She wanted to say something, but her throat was dry. Dr. Green waited and did not rush. Her face remained calm, her eyes watching Ethan, but without pressure. Finally, he raised his head. His voice was so quiet that Lisa could barely hear it. "This is Mom," he said, pointing to a figure with yellow hair, "and Dad." His finger moved to the departing man, lingered there for a second, then slid to the third figure. "And this is someone else's uncle." Dr. Green nodded, her voice becoming even softer. "Someone else's uncle? Who is he, Ethan? Do you know him?" He swallowed, his fingers tightening on the sleeve, thread starting to come out of the seam. He looked at the drawing, then at the floor, and whispered, "I heard my mother talking about him. About Ryan. At night, when she and Dad were screaming." Lisa felt the world around her freeze. Her face turned pale, her hands trembled on her bag. Ryan. He heard. She remembered that night in the kitchen, the screams, the tears, how she screamed Ryan's name when Tom pressed her to the truth. She thought Ethan was sleeping. She thought the door would muffle the sounds, but he was not sleeping. He heard everything, her lies, her betrayal, her shame. She looked at him, but he did not look at her, only at the drawing, where she was holding the hand of this alien uncle, and Tom was going into the darkness. Dr. Green turned to Lisa, her gaze calm but attentive. "Lisa, do you want to say something?" she asked quietly, without judgment. Lisa opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked quickly, trying to clear them away. I didn't know what he heard," she whispered, her voice breaking. It's my fault, all this." She clutched the bag, her nails digging into her skin, and looked at Ethan. "Sorry, honey. I didn't want you to know." Ethan didn't answer, only squeezed his sleeve tighter. His face was motionless, but something flashed in his eyes, pain, anger, fear, all together. Dr. Green put her pen on her notepad and leaned toward Ethan. "Thanks for showing me, Ethan. This is important. Well done for what you drew. Now I understand better how you feel. We'll work with it, okay? Together." He nodded, barely, and folded the drawing in half, putting it back in his pocket. Dr. Green looked at Lisa, her voice becoming a little firmer. "Lisa, this is hard for both of you." Ethan expressed what he couldn't say in words. "Give it time, but don't close yourself off from it. We'll figure it out." Lisa nodded, feeling the guilt pressing down on her like a stone. She looked at Ethan, at his small hands clutching his pocket, and realized that she had destroyed more than she thought. The session ended after 20 minutes, but for her it lasted forever. They left the office in silence, Lisa clutching the steering wheel all the way home, and Ethan looking out the window, where the sun had already disappeared behind the clouds. Tom stood at the front door of the house on Maple Street on Saturday morning, feeling like a stranger. It was 9:45. The sky hung low, gray, with rare glimpses of the sun that did not warm. He was wearing the same jacket he had worn the night he left dark green, with frayed cuffs and jeans that he hadn't washed since he checked into the motel. His Ford sat in the driveway, the engine still ticking, cooling down from the drive. He hadn't been here since that night almost 2 weeks, and every step toward the porch felt like walking through a minefield. He called Lisa yesterday, briefly, dryly. "I want to pick up Ethan for the weekend." She agreed, her voice tired, but without argument. Now he stood here, clutching his keys in his pocket, and waited. The door opened and Lisa appeared on the threshold. Her face was pale, there were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. She was wearing a gray t-shirt with a school logo and old sweatpants. She looked at him, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes did not meet his. "Ethan is getting ready," she said quietly, stepping aside. "Come in if you want." Tom shook his head. "I'll wait here." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken since the morning. He didn't want to go in. He didn't want to see the kitchen where they had screamed, or the living room where he had last sat with Ethan as if everything was normal. Lisa nodded, leaving the door ajar, and disappeared inside. Tom leaned against the porch railing, looking at the maple tree across the street. The leaves were just beginning to turn green, small, weak, as if spring did not dare to come. He heard footsteps inside, Lisa's muffled voice, "Ethan, Dad is waiting," and finally the rustle of sneakers. Ethan walked out, backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing the same blue sweatshirt and jeans. His hair was disheveled, his eyes looked at the floor, but when he saw Tom, he raised his head slightly. "Hi, son," Tom said, forcing himself to smile. The smile came out forced, but he tried. "Are you ready to spend the weekend with me?" Ethan nodded, silently, and stepped towards him. Lisa stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You'll bring him back on Sunday evening," she said, her voice even, but there was a hint of fatigue in it. "Call me if anything happens." Tom nodded without looking at her. "Certainly. Let's go, Ethan." He put his hand on his son's shoulder, squeezed it lightly, and they walked to the car. Lisa closed the door, and the sound of the lock clicking echoed in Tom's ears like a point at the end of a chapter. The journey to his apartment took 15 minutes. Tom rented this place 3 days ago, a small studio 3 miles off Maple Street, in an old brick house with peeling paint and creaky stairs. He was tired of the motel, the smell of cigarettes, the humming air conditioner, the loneliness that was too loud there. The apartment was cheap, $500 a month, with a minimum of furniture. A bed with a sagging mattress, a sofa with stains, a table with 2 chairs, and a TV that only got 5 channels. He bought sheets, a couple of pillows, and a microwave at a thrift store, but it still wasn't home. This was the place where he slept, ate, and tried not to think. They walked up to the second floor, Tom in front, Ethan behind him, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The key in the lock turned with difficulty, the door creaked, and they entered. The inside smelled of dampness and the cheap cleaner Tom had used to wipe the floor the day before. Light poured through a single window, dim with age, overlooking the parking lot and trash cans. Tom threw the keys on the table and turned to Ethan. "Well, here's my new corner. It's not a palace, but you can live there. Throw your backpack wherever you want." Ethan nodded, threw his backpack off the couch, and looked around. His eyes slid over the bare walls, over the box of pizza on the table, over the pile of clothes in the corner that Tom didn't have time to sort out. He didn't say anything, just sat down on the couch with his hands in his pockets. Tom looked at him, feeling his insides shrink. Ethan looked smaller than usual, thin shoulders, drooping head. He was the same, but different, as if part of him remained at home. "Hungry?" Tom asked, opening the refrigerator. There wasn't much there: beer, leftover Chinese food, a pack of cheese. "I can order pizza, or heat up the nuggets. I bought them yesterday." "Pizza," Ethan said quietly, without looking up. His voice was almost a whisper, but Tom caught it. "Great. Pepperoni as always." Tom pulled out his phone and opened the delivery app. Ethan nodded and Tom ordered, feeling faintly relieved. Pizza is familiar. This is what they used to do at home on Saturdays. Maybe at least this will bring something back. While they were waiting for food, Tom turned on the TV. The screen flickered, showing interference, but then picked up a movie channel. It was Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, a cartoon that Ethan had watched 100 times but still loved. Tom plopped down on the sofa next to his son, leaving a pillow between them. "Do you remember how we watched it in the movies?" "You spilled all the popcorn then," he said, trying to diffuse the silence. Ethan nodded. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, but a smile did not come out. He looked at the screen where Miles Morales was jumping across rooftops, but his eyes were blank, as if he couldn't see. Tom watched him, feeling the words get stuck in his throat. He wanted to ask how things were going, what was happening at home, but didn't know where to start. Instead, he remained silent, listening to the sounds of the movie and the creaking of the sofa under their weight. The pizza arrived in half an hour. Tom took the box from the delivery guy, a skinny guy in a red cap, who muttered, "Thank you," for the tip and placed it on the table. The smell of pepperoni and cheese filled the room, warm and familiar. He took a couple of paper plates from the stack, put a piece for himself and Ethan, and handed it to his son. "Eat while it's hot." Ethan took the pizza, took a small bite, but chewed slowly, looking at the screen. The movie had been on for about 40 minutes. Miles had just met Peter Parker, and the music was blaring through the old TV speakers. Tom ate in silence, feeling the cheese stick to the roof of his mouth, but had no appetite. He looked at Ethan, at his thin fingers squeezing the crust, and could not stand it. "How are you, son?" he asked quietly, putting the plate on the table. "At school, at home. How are you?" Ethan shrugged, not looking up from the screen. "Fine." His voice was even, but there was a wall in it. Tom nodded, rubbing his neck. "If something is wrong, tell me, okay? I'm here to help." Ethan was silent. The slice of pizza remained in his hand, untouched. He watched Miles jump through the portal, but then suddenly turned to Tom. His eyes were dark, serious, and his voice wavered as he asked, "Are you coming home?" Tom froze. The question hit him like a fist in the chest, and he felt the air stuck in his lungs. He looked at Ethan, at his face, so familiar, with freckles on his nose and dark hair falling on his forehead, and did not know what to say. Will he come back? He didn't know. Lisa, Ryan, the screams in the kitchen, all this stood between him and the house, like a wall that he could not break through. But Ethan was looking at him, waiting, and Tom couldn't leave him without an answer. He swallowed, put his hand on his son's shoulder, and squeezed lightly. I I don't know, son," he said honestly, his voice hoarse. "Everything is complicated with Mom. But I promise you one thing, I will always be there. Even if not at home, even if here. You are my son, and that will never change." Ethan looked at him, his lips trembling, but he did not cry. He nodded, slowly, and turned to the TV. Tom removed his hand, feeling his heart clench. He wanted to say more, to explain, but the words seemed empty. Instead, he took another slice of pizza, even though he didn't want to eat it, and started watching the movie, pretending that everything was fine. A few minutes later, as Miles was learning how to control the web, Ethan spoke again, quietly, almost in a whisper. "Mom takes me to a psychologist." Tom turned to him, blinking. "To a psychologist?" He put the plate on the table and leaned closer. "When? For what?" Ethan shrugged, fiddling with the hem of his sweatshirt. "After school, Aunt Dr. Green was there. She said to draw. Mom says this is so that I won't feel so bad." His voice was even, but there was a shadow of something in it, shame, perhaps, or confusion. Tom frowned, feeling everything boiling inside. Psychologist. Lisa didn't tell him. She didn't call, didn't warn. But he pushed away the anger, not in front of Ethan. He looked at his son, at his thin shoulders, at his fingers squeezing the fabric, and asked, "And how is it? Does it help?" Ethan shrugged again. "Don't know. I drew a picture. About Mom, you, and one uncle." She asked about him. He fell silent, looking at the screen where Peter Parker was joking with Miles. Tom clenched his fists, but forced himself to relax. One uncle. He knew who it was. Ryan. Ethan knew about Ryan. His stomach clenched, But he didn't ask, he didn't want to push. He didn't want Ethan to shut down. Instead, he nodded. It's good that you draw. If it helps, do it. And if something is wrong, tell me, okay? I'm here. Ethan nodded, weakly, and went back to his pizza. The film went on, but Tom didn't watch. He thought about Lisa, about the psychologist, about how Ethan knew more than he thought. The weekend had just begun, and he already felt like he was drowning in it all, but for Ethan's sake, he held on. A few days had passed since Tom had taken Ethan away for the weekend, and the tension in his life was only increasing. He returned to his small apartment on Sunday evening, drove Ethan home, nodded curtly to Lisa at the door, and left without another word. But Ethan's words about the psychologist, "Mom is taking me to Dr. Green," couldn't get out of my head. He didn't know what to think. Be angry with Lisa for what she didn't say, or be grateful that at least someone was trying to help their son. On Monday morning, while he was drinking instant coffee in his studio, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was warm and familiar. Dr. Emily Green. "Mr. Clark, this is Dr. Green, Ethan's psychologist," she said, her tone soft but matter of fact. "I talked to Lisa, and I think we should all meet together. Joint session. This is important to Ethan. Can you come on Wednesday at 11? Tom froze, holding the mug in his hand. Joint session. With Lisa. He hadn't really seen her since that night in the kitchen and hadn't spoken more than a couple of sentences. But Dr. Green continued, "Ethan is going through a lot, and I think you both need to hear it." From himself. "Please think about it." He swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "I will come." She thanked her and hung up, and Tom remained standing, looking at the steam rising from the coffee and realizing that there was nowhere to retreat. Lisa received the same call Tuesday as she stood in the teacher's lounge at her school, holding a stack of fourth-grade notebooks. Her heart began to pound when Dr. Green mentioned Tom and the shared session. She didn't want to see him, not after all he had shouted, not after he had left. But the doctor's voice was insistent. "This is for Ethan, Lisa. He needs both of you." She agreed, quietly, almost in a whisper, and did not sleep all night, looking at the ceiling and feeling guilt squeezing her like a vice. Wednesday arrived with overcast skies and a cold wind blowing leaves across the asphalt. Tom arrived at Dr. Green's office first, parking the Ford in the parking lot next to her building. He walked out, pulling his jacket around him, and stood there for a minute, looking at the sign that said, "Emily Green, PsyD." His hands shook, but he put them in his pockets and walked up the stairs. Lisa appeared 5 minutes later, Hero Honda parked 2 places from his car. She got out, wearing jeans and a gray sweater, with a bag over her shoulder, and their eyes met for a second. Nobody said a word. They rose in silence, their footsteps echoing down the corridor until they reached the door. Dr. Green greeted them with the same warm smile. She was wearing a dark blue blouse and trousers, her glasses were hanging on a chain, and her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside. "Ethan is already here. I picked him up from school an hour early." "Come in." The room was familiar. Light blue walls, a carpet with stars, a sofa with pillows. Ethan was sitting on the couch, wearing a blue sweatshirt and jeans, his backpack lying next to him. In front of him on a low table was a stack of drawings, 3 sheets folded in half. But the top one was open, and Tom immediately recognized the one that Ethan had shown Dr. Green. Lisa with someone else's uncle, himself, walking off into the darkness. His stomach clenched, but he forced himself to walk over and sit in the chair to the left of the sofa. Lisa sat down on the right, her hands clutching her bag, her eyes downcast. Dr. Green settled into her chair at the table, took the notepad, but did not open it. She looked at Ethan, then at Tom and Lisa. "Today we are here to talk together," she began, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan worked hard, painted, and I think it's important for you to see how he feels. Ethan, do you want to show Mom and Dad your drawings?" Ethan nodded, slowly, his fingers fiddling with his sleeve. He took the top drawing, the one they had already glimpsed, and handed it to Dr. Green. She took it, unfolded it completely, and raised it so that Tom and Lisa could see. "This is the first drawing Ethan brought in last week," she said. "Tell them who it is, Ethan." He swallowed, looking at the paper. His voice was quiet, trembling. "This is Mom," he said, pointing to a figure with yellow hair. "And someone else's uncle, Ryan, and Dad, he goes there." His finger pointed to the black darkness in the corner, and he fell silent, lowering his hand. Lisa covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filled with tears. Tom felt his throat tighten, but held it in, clenching his fists on his knees. Dr. Green nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. And here is the second drawing." "Show me." Ethan took the next sheet and unfolded it. It was a new drawing, a house on Maple Street, drawn in brown pencil, with a white fence and a maple tree by the porch. But the windows were black, empty, and the door was red, greasy, like blood. In front of the house stood a small figure himself, in a blue sweatshirt, with his head bowed. "This is our home," he said quietly. "But he is not the same as before. I'm standing outside because I don't want to go in." Tom looked at the drawing, feeling tears burning his eyes. He blinked, shooing them away, but Ethan's voice cut him like a knife. Lisa sobbed, her hand trembled near her face, but she was silent, looking at the black windows. "And the third," Dr. Green said, her voice remaining calm. Ethan unfolded the last sheet. It was a simple picture, himself in the center, with two figures on his sides, Tom and Lisa, drawn in blue and yellow. But between them there was a crack, black, zigzag, tearing the paper in half. "Tell me about this one, Ethan." He pressed his lips together, his fingers trembling. "It's me, Mom and Dad," he said, almost in a whisper. "But you are not together, and it's because of me. If I were better, you wouldn't shout. Dad wouldn't have left." Tom felt something inside him breaking. He opened his mouth, but his voice disappeared, tears welled up, and he clenched his fists harder to hold them back. Ethan blamed himself. His son, his boy, thought it was his fault. He looked at Lisa. She covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders were trembling. Quiet sobs escaped from under her palms. Dr. Green placed the drawings on the table and leaned towards Ethan. "Ethan, you are very brave for showing this," she said softly. "You think it's because of you, right? But listen to me. It's not your fault. Mom and Dad are adults, and they decide what to do. You can't fix it because you didn't break it." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were wet, and he quickly wiped them with his sleeve. Tom couldn't stand it. He got up, went to the sofa, and sat down next to his son, putting his hand on his shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice trembling, but he forced himself to speak. "It's not because of you. Don't ever think like that. It was us. My mom and I screwed up. You're the best, do you hear? Best." Lisa raised her head. Her face was wet with tears. Her eyes were red. "Ethan, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know you thought that way. It's my fault, not yours." Ethan looked at them, his small face confused, but he didn't move away from Tom. Dr. Green watched, her gaze warm but serious. "You both see how he feels," she said quietly. "He loves you, but he's confused. And he took it upon himself because he doesn't know how else. You need to show him that he doesn't have to bear this." Tom nodded, squeezing Ethan's shoulder. The tears still stung, but he held on. Lisa wiped her face with her sleeve, her hands trembling. They sat in silence, looking at the drawings, at Mom and Ryan, at the empty house, at the crack between them. For the first time in weeks, they were in the same room, not shouting, not accusing, but listening. And for the first time, they realized how far they had come. Ethan didn't say anything else, just sat between them, small, fragile, but still their son. The session ended after half an hour. Dr. Green invited them to come again, together or separately, but Tom and Lisa just nodded, unable to find words. They walked out of the office in silence, Ethan between them, his backpack slung over his shoulder. They stood in the parking lot, looking at each other across the chasm they had created, and knew that for Ethan's sake, they had to change something. After her family session with Dr. Green, Lisa felt like she had been turned inside out. She returned home with Ethan that same day, Wednesday, driving in silence as he stared out the window, backpack clutched in his lap. The pictures her mother with someone else's uncle, the empty house, the crack between her and Tom burned in her memory like a brand. And Ethan's words, "It's because of me," cut her deeper than anything. She didn't sleep that night, lying in bed, looking at the ceiling where the shadows of the street lamp drew patterns, and realized that she could no longer run away. Ryan was her mistake, her weakness, her attempt to hide from the emptiness in her marriage. But now she saw that this escape had cost her her son. Thursday morning came with a cold wind and clouds covering the sky like a gray curtain. Lisa got up early, before the alarm clock, and made coffee on the stove bitter, black, without sugar, as a punishment. Ethan was still asleep, his door was closed, and she did not wake him. She knew that she wouldn't take him to school today, not after yesterday, not after everything. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, clutching her mug, and dialed Ryan's number. Her fingers trembled as the beeps came one after another, and when he answered, his voice light, slightly mocking, cut her like a knife. "Lisa, hello," he said, and she heard noise in the background, children's voices, a whistle. He was in the gym of the school where he worked. "I didn't expect your call so early. Did something happen?" She swallowed, feeling her throat go dry. "We need to meet," she said quietly but firmly. "Today, now, this is important." Ryan was silent for a second, then chuckled. "Okay, I'm free in an hour. Jake's on 5th and Broadway. Let's drink coffee." "Okay," she replied and hung up before he could add anything else. Her hands were shaking, but she clenched them into fists, forcing herself to compose herself. "This needs to be finished." She left a note for Ethan on the table. "I'll be back soon, eat some cereal if you wake up," and left the house. The Honda started up the first time, the engine hummed, and Lisa drove to Jake's Cafe, a small place with shabby tables and the smell of frying bacon, where she and Ryan had met a couple of times when it all started. The journey took 15 minutes, but every second seemed like an eternity. She parked at the curb, looking at the neon coffee cup sign, and waited for him to pull up. Ryan showed up half an hour later, his red Dodge parked next to her car. He came out, wearing a sports jacket and jeans, with the same smile that had once seemed charming to her. Now she saw only emptiness in her. He waved his hand at her, walked towards the entrance, and they sat down at a table by the window. The waitress, an elderly woman with tired eyes, brought them coffee in cracked white mugs, and Lisa squeezed hers, feeling the heat burn her palms. "Well, what happened?" Ryan asked, taking a sip. His tone was light, as if it was an ordinary day. "You look like you haven't slept." Lisa looked at him. Her eyes were dry but red. "This is the end, Ryan," she said quietly but firmly. "It's all over between us." He froze, the mug stopping halfway to his mouth. The smile disappeared, replaced by surprise. "What? Seriously? Because of what?" She pursed her lips, feeling everything boiling inside. "Because of everything. Because of Ethan. Because of Tom. Because I destroyed my family for this." She waved her hand between them, her voice trembling. "You were a mistake. Let's escape. I thought I needed you, but you're just empty space." Ryan frowned and put his mug down. "Escape? Lisa, you came to me yourself. I didn't force you. You said that with Tom everything is dead, that you need life. And now it's my fault." "No," she said, and her voice grew louder. "It's my fault. I followed you because I didn't want to look at my problems. But now I see what I have lost. Ethan. He blames himself. He thinks it's because of him that Tom and I broke up. And it's because of me. Because of us." Ryan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Ethan is a child, Lisa. Children always think this way. This doesn't mean that you should drop everything and run back. We had a good time, didn't we?" She laughed, short, bitterly. "Did you have a good time? Is that all you can say? My son throws chairs at school, my husband left, and I'm sitting here with you, drinking coffee, as if nothing happened. That's not good, Ryan. This is the end." He looked at her, his face became harder, but he did not argue. "Okay," he said finally, shrugging his shoulders. Your life, your decision. But don't expect me to be bored. I have enough to do. Lisa stood up, throwing a fiver on the coffee table. Goodbye, Ryan, she said and left without looking back. The cafe door slammed behind her, and she got into the car, feeling tears burning her eyes, but she didn't let them escape. She started the engine and drove home, realizing she had closed one door, but didn't know how to open the other. The house was quiet. Ethan was sitting in the living room, watching TV, some cartoon about robots, with a bowl of half-eaten cereal standing on the coffee table. Lisa came in, throwing her bag on the couch, and stood in the doorway, looking at him. His hair was disheveled, his sweatshirt slipped slightly off his shoulder, and his eyes looked at the screen but did not see. She felt the guilt pressing down on her like a stone, but now there was something more to it: determination. She walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it in one gulp, feeling the cold cooling her throat. Then she returned to the living room and sat on the sofa next to Ethan, but not too close. He didn't turn, but she noticed his shoulders tense slightly. Lisa swallowed and clasped her hands in her lap. Ethan, she said quietly, her voice shaking, I have to tell you something. He didn't answer, but his gaze slid to her, quickly, then back to the TV. She continued, forcing the words to come out. I made a lot of mistakes. With Dad, with you. This, Uncle you heard about. Ryan, I'm not seeing him anymore. This was wrong. I shouldn't have. And I'm so sorry that you suffered because of this. Ethan was silent, his fingers gripping the edge of his hoodie, but he didn't move. Lisa felt tears welling up, but she blinked them away. I didn't know how much you were hurting, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could handle it, that I could keep everything in order. But I couldn't cope. Forgive me, sunshine, for everything. She fell silent, looking at him, expecting at least something: a scream, tears, a question. But he sat quietly, looking at the screen where robots fought monsters. Lisa pursed her lips, feeling hope fading, but then she did something she hadn't done for a long time. She stretched out her arms and hugged him. Not too hard, without squeezing, she just grabbed his thin shoulders, pulling him towards her. She waited for him to break free, to push her away, as he had been doing for the past few days, but he did not move. Just sitting there, letting her hold him, and that was more than she could have hoped for. I love you, Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling, tears still escaping, dripping onto his sweatshirt. And I will do everything to make you feel better. I promise. He didn't answer, didn't turn, didn't hug her back. But he didn't pull away, and his breathing was even calm, as if he was just accepting it. Lisa held him, feeling the warmth of his body, the smell of baby shampoo in his hair, and for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe all was not lost. They sat like that for several minutes until the cartoon ended and the screen flashed with advertising. Lisa let him go, wiped her face with her sleeve, and stood up to put the bowl away. Ethan remained on the couch, staring into space, but his shoulders relaxed, and it was a small step, the first in weeks. After his family session with Dr. Green, Tom felt broken, but there was something new about it: not just pain, but a glimmer of hope. Ethan's drawings, his words about wine, Lisa's tears, all this sat in him like a thorn, but the promise he made to his son sounded strongest: I will always be there. He returned to his small apartment on Wednesday evening, lay down on the sagging mattress, and stared for a long time at the ceiling, where the cracks drew a map of his life. He didn't know how to get his family back, didn't know if he would forgive Lisa, but he knew one thing: Ethan was his anchor, and he couldn't lose it. On Friday morning, while the sun was just rising above the horizon, Tom decided to do something they hadn't done in months. He called Lisa briefly, without further ado. I want to take Ethan fishing tomorrow, he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Just like before. Can I? Lisa was silent for a second, then answered quietly, Yes, he will be glad. Come by at 9. She didn't ask how things were going, didn't mention Ryan, and Tom was grateful for that. He hung up, feeling his nerves taut, but there was a spark in his chest. Fishing. This was Ethan and him Saturdays by the lake, fishing rods, laughing as the fish got off the hook. Maybe this will bring something back. Saturday started with clear skies and a light wind rustling the leaves on the maple trees along Maple Street. Tom arrived promptly at 9, his Ford humming in the driveway, and he walked out, pulling his jacket close. In the trunk were fishing rods old, with worn handles, a box of bait, a couple of folding chairs, and a thermos of coffee that he had brewed in the microwave. He knocked on the door, and Lisa opened it almost immediately. Her face was pale but calm, her eyes were slightly red, as if she had been crying recently. She was wearing the same gray sweater as at the session and jeans. "Ethan is ready," she said, stepping aside. "He's in the living room." Tom nodded without going inside. "Thank you. I'll return it by evening." He wanted to say something else, but the words stuck, and he just waited. Ethan came out a minute later, wearing a blue sweatshirt and sneakers, with a small backpack slung over his shoulder. His hair was disheveled, but something flashed in his eyes, not a smile, but interest. "Fishing?" he asked quietly, looking at Tom. "Yeah, just like before," Tom said, smiling wider than he felt. "Lake Mills, where we caught that big pike, remember?" Ethan nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. "She lost it," he said, and it was the first thing he had said to Tom without tension in weeks. Tom felt something melt inside. "Let's go, son," he said, opening the car door. Ethan climbed into the front seat, throwing his backpack down, and Tom got behind the wheel. Lisa stood in the doorway, looking at them, but said nothing. The car pulled away, and the house on Maple Street was left behind, fading into the morning light. The drive to Lake Mills took 40 minutes. It was a small lake about a half hour from Columbus, surrounded by pine and willow trees, with a wooden pier that creaked underfoot. They went there every summer when Ethan was younger, Tom teaching him how to cast a fishing rod, and Lisa sometimes sitting on the shore with a book, laughing when they returned with empty buckets. Now she was gone, but Tom pushed those thoughts away, concentrating on the road. The radio was playing an oldie, "Sweet Home Alabama" by Lynyrd Skynyrd, and he turned up the volume a little, hoping the music would fill the silence. Ethan looked out the window, where trees and fields flashed by, his hands resting on his knees. Tom glanced at him, trying to understand what he was thinking. "You haven't fished for a long time," he said to start the conversation. "Do you remember how to hold the fishing rod?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. You said that you need to jerk sharply when it bites." His voice was quiet, but there was a sense of memory in it. Tom smiled. "Exactly. And don't forget the bait, they like worms best." He pointed to the box at Ethan's feet, where the earthworms he had bought yesterday at the fishing store were swarming. They arrived at the lake at 9:30. The air was fresh, smelled of water and pine needles. The wind drove small waves across the surface. The pier was empty except for a seagull sitting on the edge, looking at them as if they were strangers. Tom pulled the fishing rods and chairs out of the trunk, Ethan grabbed the bait box, and they walked toward the water. The boards creaked underfoot, but they held, and Tom placed chairs at the edge of the pier, where the water was deeper. "It's good here," he said, unwinding the fishing line. "You catch first, son." He handed Ethan the fishing rod, helped him put the worm on the hook slippery, squirming, and showed him how to cast it. Ethan did it clumsily, the line flopped into the water closer than it should, but he was not upset. He just sat down on a chair and waited. Tom sat down next to him and cast his fishing rod a little further. The sun rose higher, reflecting golden reflections on the water, and the silence between them was not as heavy as before. He poured coffee from a thermos into the lid, took a sip hot, slightly bitter, and watched Ethan's float bob on the waves. Time passed slowly but calmly, as if the lake was lulling them to sleep. Half an hour later, Ethan's float twitched. He froze, looking at him, then turned to Tom. "Dad, is it biting?" he asked, his voice perking up a little. "Pull, quickly," Tom said, putting the thermos on the pier. Ethan pulled the fishing rod up. The line tightened, and a second later a fish slipped out of the water small, no larger than a hand, silver, with dark spots. She jerked on the hook, splashes flew to the sides, and Ethan laughed short, loudly, for the first time in weeks. Tom felt his heart jump. This laughter pure, childish, so familiar was like a ray of light in the darkness. "Well done, son," he said, smiling wider than he could. "First of the day. Pike, look how nimble it is." Ethan held the fishing rod, looking at the fish, his eyes sparkling. "She's small," he said, but there was something like pride in his voice. He leaned closer while Tom took the fish off the hook and released it back into the water. It plopped down and disappeared into the depths. "Small, but yours," Tom said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We'll catch you yet, don't worry." Ethan nodded, the smile gone, but there was something light in his face that wasn't there before. They cast their fishing rods again, and Tom looked at him, feeling the warmth spreading in his chest. This moment, the lake, the fishing rods, the laughter was theirs as before. Ethan was here with him, and that was what mattered most. He realized, sitting on a creaky chair, with coffee in his hand and the wind in his face, that his son was his main connection with the past, with who he was before all this pain. And he will not lose it, no matter what happens to Lisa, to the house, to their family. They stayed at the lake until noon, caught 2 more fish, one larger, the other just as small, and Tom got out the peanut butter sandwiches he had bought along the way. They ate in silence, looking at the water, and the silence was warm, like the sun breaking through the clouds. Ethan didn't ask about the house or his mom, and Tom was grateful for that. Today it was just them, the lake and the fish, and that was enough. When they got back together, Tom put the fishing rods in the trunk, and Ethan carried the bait box, empty but still smelling of earth. "Shall we go again?" Ethan asked quietly as he got into the car. Tom looked at him and nodded. "Definitely, son, as much as you want." He started the engine, and they drove home, leaving the lake behind, but taking this day with them, a small but important step towards what can still be saved. A month has passed since Tom and Ethan went fishing, and life, although still broken, began to acquire new habits. Tom called Ethan every evening, even if he only spoke for a couple of minutes, asking about school, about Batman, about everything that came to mind. Lisa no longer ran into lies. She quit school after her breakup with Ryan, took a break to figure out what she wanted next, and spent her days with Ethan, trying to be there for her even when he was silent. Sessions with Dr. Emily Green became their anchor once a week. On Wednesdays, they gathered in her cozy office, where blue walls and a starry carpet gave a sense of stability. It was the last session, Dr. Green said over the phone Tuesday, adding, "Ethan has taken a big step, and I want you to see it together." Wednesday arrived with the soft November sun shining through the bare branches of the maples. Tom arrived at the house on Maple Street at 10 o'clock in the morning. His Ford honked in the driveway, and he walked out, wrapping his jacket around him, the same green one, but now washed. Lisa opened the door. She was wearing a dark blue sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back into a low ponytail. Her face was tired, but calm, without the tension it had before. Ethan stood behind her, wearing a blue sweatshirt and sneakers, a backpack slung over one shoulder. In his hands, he held a sheet of paper folded in half, and Tom noticed how his fingers trembled slightly as he squeezed it. "Ready?" Tom asked, looking at his son Ethan, trying to smile. The smile came out weak, but sincere. Ethan nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Yes," he said quietly, and Lisa stepped forward, closing the door behind her. "Let's go," she said. Her voice was even, but there was a hint of warmth in it. They got into Lisa's Honda, Tom in the front seat, Ethan in the back, and drove to Dr. Green's office. The road was silent, only the radio was playing some old jazz quietly, but no one turned it off. Outside the window flashed houses, lawns covered with fallen leaves, and a sky as clear as glass. They arrived at 11. Dr. Green's office was the same as always. A white building with a neat sign, a staircase with threadbare carpet, a door marked Emily Green, PsyD. Tom walked ahead. Lisa and Ethan followed him. Their steps echoed in the corridor. Dr. Green greeted them with a smile, her dark blue turtleneck and glasses on a chain making her look like a kind aunt. "It's good to see you all," she said, stepping aside. "Come in, get settled." The room was familiar. Light blue walls, a sofa with pillows, a basket of toys in the corner. The sun poured through the window, reflecting on the carpet of stars, and the air smelled of lavender like the first time. Ethan sat down on the sofa, putting his backpack next to him. Lisa and Tom sat in armchairs on either side. Dr. Green took her chair by the desk, but left her notepad closed and her hands in her lap. "Today is our last session," she began, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan did a great job, and I'm proud of him. You too, Lisa, Tom. You were both here, listening, trying. This is important. Ethan, did you bring something to show?" Ethan nodded, slowly unfolding the piece of paper he was holding. His fingers trembled slightly, but he did not hide his gaze as before. He placed the drawing on the low table in front of the sofa, smoothed it out with his palm, and Tom and Lisa leaned closer to look. The drawing was simple but bright. In the center stood Ethan, drawn in blue pencil, in his sweatshirt, with a smile, a wide, childish one that they had not seen for a long time. On the left was Lisa, yellow hair, gray jacket. Her hand held his left palm. On the right is Tom, in a dark blue sweater, with dark hair, holding his right hand. They stood on opposite sides. Between them there was an emptiness, not a crack, as before, but a white space, pure but dividing. Above them was the sky blue, with small clouds, and the sun in the corner, drawn with a yellow felt tip pen. Dr. Green leaned over, her glasses sliding down slightly. "It's beautiful, Ethan," she said quietly. "Tell us about him." Ethan swallowed, his voice weak but clear. "It's me, Mom, and Dad," he said, pointing to the figures. "You are not together, but hold me. And I smile, because you're both here." He fell silent, looking at the drawing, then added more quietly, "I don't want you to scream again." Tom felt his throat tighten. He looked at Ethan smiling on the paper, at his blue lines holding his hand, and tears burned his eyes. He blinked, shooing them away, but his voice wavered when he spoke. "Son," he said, leaning towards him, "we won't shout. I promise. You are the most important thing to me, do you hear?" Lisa sobbed, her hand rose to her mouth, but tears were already flowing down her cheeks. She looked at the drawing, at the yellow one, at Ethan between them, and her shoulders trembled. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "I love you so much. We will do everything to make you happy." Dr. Green smiled, her gaze warm but serious. "Ethan, you showed what you need," she said. "Mom and Dad are on opposite sides, but they hold you together. It's a big thing to say this. Do you both see what he wants?" Tom nodded, clenching his fists on his knees to control himself. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "I see. I'll be there, always, even if my mother and I are not together." Lisa wiped her face with her sleeve, her voice trembling. "Me too, Ethan. We will probably get divorced, but you are our son. We'll be more careful, I promise." Ethan looked at them, his eyes clear, without tears. He nodded, weakly but confidently, and folded the drawing in half, stuffing it into his backpack. Dr. Green stood up, her smile widening. "You all did a great job," she said. "Ethan, you are stronger than you think. And you, Tom, Lisa, you found a way to be parents, even separated. This is not the end, this is the beginning. If anything goes wrong, my door is open, but I believe in you." The session ended after 20 minutes. They walked out of the office in silence, Ethan between them, his backpack slung over his shoulder. In the parking lot, Tom and Lisa stopped at the Honda, looking at each other across a space that was no longer an abyss, but simply distance. "We can handle it," Tom said quietly, his voice firm. "For his sake." Lisa nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, for his sake." She turned to Ethan, stroked his head, and he didn't move away, he just stood there, looking at them. They got into the car, drove home, and the sun shone through the glass, casting warm rays on their faces. The divorce was ahead, the pain had not yet gone away, but at that moment they were together, not like a family from the past, but like something new, fragile, but alive. Ethan looked out the window, his lips curling slightly into a smile, and Tom and Lisa knew that this smile was their hope, their promise, their chance to start again. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story. because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.